ABC Listen. Podcasts, radio, news, music and more.
Hello, Patrick Stack here. We've got something a little bit different to our normal show today. Bruce McAvaney is joining us, and not as a guest, but as a guest host. And the reason for that is because members of the International Olympic Committee are about to elect a new president, and one person chasing that post is Lord Sebastian Coe. He's granted Bruce a rare interview, and Bruce has agreed to share that with us very generously. Bruce, there are sports administration roles that are big, and then there is the IOC president. Can you maybe just paint us a picture as to why this is just so significant?
Well, Patrick, the Olympics are at a very interesting stage, aren't they? They had a huge success in Paris last year, but they needed it. They really did, because it followed on from the COVID situation in Tokyo, where the athletes did compete 12 months later, and that was a great thing to do. But before empty stands, and then 5 years before that, a difficult Olympic Games in Rio. So they needed a big success story. They got that in Paris. Thomas Bach's long reign has come to an end. You'd have to say that he started with a lot of difficulties, but he finished with a flourish. So the role of the president of the IOC is more than just symbolic. It is really strategic. It is important. And the future and the vision will be determined, I think, over the next 2 months as to where the Olympics will be in 20 years' time, remembering that we'll be a big part of that in Brisbane in just a few years' time now in 2032.
There is so much ground to cover. I'm excited to hear your conversation. Here's Bruce McAvaney's interview with Lord Sebastian Coe. This is ABC Sport Daily.
However you look at the role of sport in geopolitics, there's no doubt the IOC president holds a position of power and influence with access to world leaders and power brokers. It's at least an 8-year job, possibly 12. The decisions and policies made by the IOC under the influence of the president trickle right down to grassroots organisations in remote and strategic locations. 3 candidates are favoured to win the vote. They include the IOC's current vice president and son of a former president, Juan Antonio Samaranch Jr., and the only woman to apply for the job, Zimbabwean former swimmer and politician, Kirsty Coventry. And then there's Lord Sebastian Coe, who's shown himself to be a driving force for change as he enters a 3rd term as president of World Athletics. Lord Coe, firstly, thank you very much. It's such a busy week for you. I want to start by asking you, how crucial will be the 15-minute speech to the Congress?
Oh, I think it's important. It gives the candidates an opportunity, not a very long opportunity, and not an opportunity followed by questions, but it does give the candidates the opportunity to perform on their feet. It's an outward-facing role. The presidency of any major organisation has to be that. It's not a CEO role. It is an outward-facing leadership role for the membership. So, yeah, I think it's important. I don't think it's going to be a deal maker or a deal breaker. I think campaigns are much longer and probably more nuanced than that. But look, yeah, of course, it's a key moment.
I'm sure there'll be some common ground, but where do you think your content may differ from the other presenters?
I don't know, because we're not in... I don't think the candidates have really discussed that. I know from the things that have been said where most of the candidates sit on most issues. For me, this is about change, but it's about change and reform with stability, and that is important. When I went to World Athletics, we were in very poor shape. Bruce, you remember, the first 2 years were pretty horrible. And it was those first 2 years that I spent probably making sure the ship didn't sink. We then rewrote the Constitution. We created some things that I now look at as being gold standard in sport, including the Athletic Integrity Unit. I'm very proud that we are the only sporting organisation in the world that has a gender-balanced council, 26 members, 13 men, 13 women, and elected through competence. So, look, that's what I stand for. And ever since the age of 11, when I first put a pair of running shoes on, I've been in training, I guess, for this role. It's not a job, it's a passion, but I've been in training for this for the bulk of my life.
You were the first athlete to address the IOC Congress, and we're going back about 40 years ago. So in terms of your manifesto, how important is the athlete who will be performing in Los Angeles and then Brisbane going forward?
It's very interesting. I actually reread the other day what I said as a fairly callow 24-year-old, and that was a big moment. To be one of the first athletes to address an Olympic Congress, that's quite a big step from somebody who just the year before graduated from university. And I look at that as a monumental moment, actually, because it was the moment, in a way, that cemented my love and affection outside of competition for the Olympic movement. It was a moment where I truly understood the complexity. And the journey the athletes have taken, for me, was an important one. It was from that group that I represented that day at the Congress that the first Athletes Commission was organised, and now, of course, that's very much a part of the furniture in every sporting organisation. But every word that I said back in 1981 I lived to, and sadly there are still issues that we're still talking about, which we shouldn't be. So the primacy of the athlete, their physical, mental and financial well-being is absolutely critical to me, and we should not delude ourselves in any sporting organisation. We're not selling ourselves as being thought leaders in sustainability or climate change. These are really important elements. We are selling ourselves because of the talent of our competitors. You know, when we, as we have at World Athletics, have just brought 2 global partners to the table in the last 6 months, they're not coming to the table because they enjoy having a cup of tea with me over a contract. They're actually joining our sport because of the God-given talents of the athletes, and they see a sport moving in the right direction. And much of this is data-driven. And the athletes sit at the heart of that. So for me, we have to place the athletes at the centre of every decision we make. It's not just about listening, it's doing more than that. It's sharing, and it is making sure that they become our commercial partners in that landscape.
It was about 20 years ago that you did pull something out of the hat when you spoke at an IOC Congress, when London went from 3rd to 1st in winning the rights to the 2012 Olympics. Have you got something you can pull out of the hat this time, do you think, Lord Coe?
Well, I was never too keen on bronze medals in my career, Bruce. I did on one occasion end up with one. I'm not decrying it. It was a wonderful achievement. But look, I'm sure I'm no different from any other of the candidates. I don't think there's much point in throwing your hat in the ring and espousing a vision and not wanting to be in a position to implement that. But implementation is important here because this isn't a one-man or a one-woman show. I'm not sure that given the complexities that lie ahead, both geopolitically, both broadcast, both commercial, the primacy of the athletes, I'm not sure that that is a job that any one person on their own can do. And this is why building teams, forming collaborative partnerships, bringing all our stakeholders to the table, not meeting infrequently to sign off the work done elsewhere by others, but bringing the stakeholders to the table and making sure that we all move together at the same pace and that we use our stakeholders as strategic partners. And that is something I think we can improve upon.
Look, Coe, there's about 7 weeks time-wise between the presentation, the 15-minute presentation, and the final vote at the Congress from March 18 to 21. So what happens for the candidates in that time?
Well, I can't speak for the other candidates, but I know I will be continuing to work very hard. It's very important that all our colleagues, our friends in the movement understand what we stand for, and we have a responsibility to be clear about that. You know, there can't be obfuscation here. You know, you stand by what you believe, you stand by what you say, and then you go out and implement it. And you should be judged on that. That is the way of any modern organisation. So I will continue to make sure, I hope, in a respectful way, that people know what I stand for, where the red lines are, whether it's about the integrity and the promotion of women's sport, whether it's about our anti-doping systems, whether it's about the immutable nature, non-negotiable nature of integrity, and a laser-like focus on sporting excellence, which is what the International Olympic Committee and the Olympic Games has to be about.
We said in the intro that there are 7 candidates, but there are 3 favourites, a son of a former president, an Olympic champion swimmer, and yourself. How influential will be the now former president, Thomas Bach, who has championed Kirsty Coventry in the past, and you've had a complicated relationship with?
Well, first of all, Bruce, you and I are actually lovers, and I like to think probably fairly knowledgeable about horse racing. I've been watching that sport for long enough to know that the bookies' favourites are not always the people that come through. This is a complicated process, and it's ultimately for the members to decide, and I think they'll make judgments probably right up to the last moment. My relationship with Thomas has always been a very strong one. When I talk about being privileged to have been invited as one of the first athletes to address an Olympic Congress, Thomas was one of those athletes. He was there when we all worked together to articulate to the Congress what the athletes were thinking at the same time. So there is a friendship, and we started in exactly the same space and have exactly the same motivations. So that's not something that I worry about. And look, it's up to others to decide who they think is the most appropriate and the most qualified. Again, I can't really speculate on that. I will just continue to work right up until the last moment.
But you did ruffle some feathers, Seb. Rio, no Russians, no official Russians. I think just one long jumper who was based in the United States in 2016. That didn't please the president at the time. And of course, more recently, prize money in Paris for gold medalists in athletics. So that relationship, whilst you call it a friendship, as I said, it has been a complicated one.
Look, I've always taken the position that you will, in any organisation, amongst people that have the best interest of that organisation at heart, you will always have a variation of views. You know, I've been in politics a large part of my life. The difference between the political parties is not in the ultimate destination. Everybody wants good education, good health systems, people in meaningful employment, defence of the realm and sound money. We know all those things. Where the differences occur is how you set about that. What is the journey you take? So I've only ever welcomed divergent views. I think anybody that knows me and works alongside me at World Athletics knows that I'm challenging. And I'm challenging people to challenge me. I don't want to be surrounded by people who feel that everything I do is perfect. I'm not infallible. I don't have the answers to everything. And that's why I always rely on really qualified HQ teams and a membership that feels engaged and emboldened to tell me when I'm not right. And I guess that's the athlete in me. You know, any athlete will tell you, and any good coach will tell you, that the difference between good and great athletes is a craving of criticism. You want to be better this time next year than you are now. Actually, most athletes want to be better tomorrow, and they expect that kind of engagement, and they don't shy away from people telling them that actually there may be an alternate direction here. I don't consider that to be a challenge of authority. I consider that to be a welcome sign that people are engaging and buying into the project.
One last thing on the president, Thomas Bach. In one of his final addresses, when he decided not to perhaps go for an extra term and extend his presidency, he talked about the need for a younger person in a changing world. Do you think, Seb, that you've been able to sell yourself as that person?
Look, there are lots of things I can do, Bruce. Taking years off my age is not one of them. And actually, I'm not sure that is a particularly time-effective way of going about it. Experience is important, and I guess the experience I place before the members, with respect, with openness, in a very genuine way, is that I have been an Olympic athlete. I've chaired a National Olympic Committee. I've won a bid and brought the most successful games to London that we could possibly have imagined. And I spent 7 years delivering an Olympic and Paralympic Games. I've chaired the number one Olympic sport, and I've spent 30 years in the sports marketing business, and I've also been a government minister. So I think that is what is on the table. It's for others to decide whether there are better qualified people to do that job.
I think you've spoken to at least 100 of the IOC members, almost all of them face to face. What type of response have you had in this campaign, as we might call it, period?
Well, having been in politics, and anybody watching this interview that's been in politics will know exactly what I say when I say that elections are rarely exact sciences. And all I can say is I've been given the time and the space to articulate what I feel strongly about, that I feel and I hope that I've given the time and the space to those members, and many of them friends, to tell me what they think the future looks like. And I like to feel that my manifesto, and in fact my presentation, is really a synthesis of that. Everything I'm going to suggest, I've heard from them, and everything that I will do, we will talk through and work through together. And I think that is the only way that a modern organisation can function properly.
Seb, you've mentioned politics a couple of times, and we know your background. So the next Olympic Games will be in Los Angeles. I'm talking Summer Olympic Games, and the President Trump has already given his support to the organising committee and said that he will be supporting LA. Dealing with world leaders, colossal figures like President Trump, I mean, firstly, how quickly would a president, the new president, go and chat to him face to face, and how do you play that political game with somebody with so much power?
Well, it's a game I've been playing for most of my life. I was a government minister. I was the chief of staff in a political party. And I've served in many roles, particularly in international politics and affairs. So this is not alien territory to me. I think, Bruce, the safest thing to say, and any foreign minister will tell you that there is rarely a one-size-fits-all. You need to be culturally savvy. You need to present your case as strongly as you can, but you need to listen, you need to be empathetic. And I'm very surprised that anybody would have thought that an incoming president for the United States with the next Summer Games in their own backyard would have been anything other than completely supportive. And that would be the foundation stones, that would be the landscape, that you can have very constructive conversations. And sometimes those conversations are tough conversations, sometimes they're behind closed doors, sometimes they will be public. This is a landscape I have lived in for many, many years, and I understand.
As we all know, there have been some terrible, devastating fires in that Los Angeles area, but the venues that will be used in 2028 haven't been damaged, but there will be a cost, Seb, in rebuilding. Will that have an effect on money spent by the organising committee looking towards 2028?
Well, I sat through a press conference the other day, I was watching obviously remotely, where the president did actually say that he was 100% behind the Games, 100% behind California, and that can only bode well. And look, I'm not a local politician in Los Angeles. I know Los Angeles well. It was my second Games, so it's a city that I have a very strong emotional feel for. But I think it is really important, and I'm sure a lot of people from Los Angeles will view it this way, that actually the Games can be part of that recovery. And yes, there'll be some challenging circumstances. Budgets are going to have to be hypothecated into recovery and renewal, and a lot of schools, hospitals, public house. The devastation was dramatic. But I was comforted from what I heard the other day at the press conference that there will be a focus on delivering a great Games, but obviously in tandem with a city that is still in pain.
Still on the political front, Russia, you took a very, very strong stand against the state-sponsored doping situation in Sochi in 2014 and hence the non-Russian participation at World Athletics Championships and at the Olympic Games and, of course, the invasion of Ukraine as well. Are we getting closer to having Russia back for World Athletics? I mean, Tokyo's this year, so to speak. where does Russia sit right now with your presidency of World Athletics sitting on your head, that hat?
Well, I think there are two very distinct issues here. The first one we worked through carefully and diligently. And as you said, Bruce, it was the doping challenges that I confronted very early in my career at World Athletics. And my council and the executive board were really clear that the integrity of our sport was non-negotiable. And look, your anti-doping policies are not simply geared to weeding out the cheats. They're there actually to protect the 99% of clean athletes that want to compete freely, fairly, openly, and want to know that there is a level playing field. That is why you have anti-doping systems. It's not simply to weed out those that choose to step beyond the written and the moral boundary. And I'm actually pleased to say that we have recovered that space with Russia. There's a new federation. We have the Athletic Integrity Unit here supervising what we call the international testing pool. They're athletes that are regulated and tested regularly. Of course, the geopolitical challenge that Russia and Ukraine now find themselves in is a very different issue, and that's an issue that the International Olympic Committee and every other individual federation has had to face. We have a working group at World Athletics that effectively monitor the situation and will make, from time to time, suggestions as to what might need to take place in order to bring Russia back into our sport. On the anti-doping front, I'm very happy to say that we've made extremely good progress. And we would not have made that progress if we just sort of sat there hoping that it was going to right itself. It was never going to do that, and that's why we did what we did, and we did it in the only way we could, which was in the best interest of athletics. And I think you can see from some of the performances, the way that some of our women have been able to break through into distances and disciplines that simply were closed to them because of the use of performance-enhancing drugs. This has been important for us. The geopolitical situation is, I'm afraid, that's above my pay grade. But if I'm privileged enough to become the next president of the International Olympic Committee, that is in my interest.
And if that does happen, and you are the next president of the International Olympic Committee, differences in sex development and transgender athletes, the complications have to be considered. As IOC president, would you advocate for the same scientific stand implemented by World Athletics?
Yes, on the simple basis that we follow the science. And I'm sorry, gender cannot trump biology. And I say that because if you do not protect and promote the integrity of women's sport, you simply do not have women's sport. Under my watch at World Athletics, I was not going to allow that to happen. And sometimes you have to make tough decisions, and those decisions don't always meet with the approval of everybody. I'm long enough in the tooth to know that. But we made the right decision, and we have given a very clear steer, and some international federations have chosen to take the same path, and that is a good thing. But look, the importance here is that there must be primacy amongst the international federations to make judgments, as we do regularly, about what is in the best interest of our sport. But I do think it is incumbent upon the International Olympic Committee to set clear guidelines, because international federations are stakeholders, national Olympic committees, and our athletes do look towards the International Olympic Committee for thought leadership and clarity of purpose.
We're in such a changing world when it comes to the business side of sport, and you mentioned about a couple of new sponsors for World Athletics, but in recent months, the IOC has lost some support from Japan, in fact, in terms of their major sponsors. And there are billions of dollars up for grabs with new broadcasting deals that will be coming up shortly. How confident are you that the Olympic movement can continue to grow?
Oh, I'm confident that the Olympic movement can continue to grow and have the future we want it to have, but we have to act, and we have to act now. And we must not be oblivious to the fact the world, particularly the commercial landscape, has changed. It's a landscape I've been in for 30 years. I often hear people saying it is changing. Actually, it isn't changing. It has changed, and it changed the best part of 10 years ago. So what we really need to do is we need to convert transactional sponsorships into collaborative partnerships. And we need to work very closely with our sponsors, our partners, and our broadcasters, because they are and should be seen as strategic partners. One thing I learned through the London years was if you have world-class businesses coming to the table to support your ambitions, the very nature of those businesses is that they tend to employ world-class people. And that is a resource to you. Many of those businesses that joined us in London for the successful outcome that we all witnessed actually played a strategic part within our organisation, sometimes through secondments. The fact that we formed a club of all the CEOs of those businesses, many of them still in strong commercial collaborative relationships 12, 13 years after the London Games. Using the people that come to your table as stakeholders is absolutely critical, and that will be at the centre of any strategy that I have in bringing those constituent parts into the fold and making the very most of those smart, creative people.
Staying with the future, some sports are under pressure, others are being introduced. Let's pick one that we know so well. Cricket makes its debut in Los Angeles. I mean, what future do you think that cricket might have going forward, and going forward towards Brisbane, in fact?
Well, I'm talking to somebody who I know understands and adores the game like I do. I think it's a very good thing that cricket is in the movement. It brings a lot of people into the Olympic family that would not necessarily be in the Olympic family. It will pose challenges. It will pose challenges around editorial priorities. It will pose challenges around the way broadcast will inevitably have to adapt, but it will also open fresh and new revenue streams and take us into markets that have been a challenge for Olympic sport. I know that through World Athletics. And India, for instance, is a very important marketplace to us. We've just carved out a new arrangement with Tata, probably the world's leading telecommunications business now, to help us with our broadcast, but more than that, to help us with the creativity that is now needed in terms of bringing your sport into the lives, particularly of young people, with an audience-first approach, which basically gives people what they want, when they want it, and where they want it. These are all critical things that, going forward, the International Olympic Committee and all sports organisations have to grapple with.
How do you think the Olympics will look sports-wise in 20 years' time? We have 10,000 plus athletes. You've mentioned perhaps some of those sports that are in summer games might be best served in winter games. Surfing's been a tick, breakdancing's been controversial. I mean, what's your vision for the look of the game, say, in 20 years' time?
I think it's really important that we all have a vision, but it has to be a shared vision. And that would be my approach with the members. We need to sit down, we need to define what we think we can achieve sensibly, coherently, efficiently and transparently. And then we need to make sure we implement what we know we are quite capable of doing. What do the games look like in 20 years? Well, I hope that we have younger people watching them. I hope that we are able to raise sport, and particularly Olympic sport, higher up the government agenda. And that's something I know how to do and do well. I want to make sure that we are seen as the thought leaders in sport. But above all, I want to make sure that the Olympic movement and Olympic sport maintains a salience, an excitement and a relevance in the lives of young people. And what do I mean by that? In a world of endless choice and distraction, it is really important that we have the discipline to understand what people are wanting from us, not what we think they want. We have to be very open about some of those changes. And young people, I've got children, I know how they consume information, I know how they consume entertainment. And at the moment, I don't think we're properly understanding the way the world for them has changed. That's what I want the Olympic movement and the Olympic Games to reflect.
If we look at Brisbane for a moment or two, 11 years was a long runway.
Too long.
Lord Coe, do you feel that...
Too long.
Yeah, well, because momentum's been slow in coming.
I think it's look, when London got across the line in 2005, we had 7 years to deliver a championship. Let me be really clear, there is no project management under normal circumstances that challenges a city in the way that an Olympic and a Paralympic Games does. And let me put that into perspective. We routinely at World Athletics give a city for maybe, if we're being generous, 5 years to deliver a world championship. Athletics is complicated, road closures, 40-odd different disciplines, jumps, throws, long, short, all the things that make us the sport that we are. If you compare that to the challenge that is thrown to an organising committee, it's not 5 years for one world championship, it's 7 years for effectively over 50 world championships. My teams in London used to smile when I said, well, you take a breather. Well, it's about a 10-day breather, and you do pretty much the same with the Paralympic Games. So it is really important that we understand the challenges that there are for Games. But having said that, there is a balance, because you don't want such a lengthy period of time that you leave local communities wondering what on earth is happening, and that is critical. The most important stakeholder you have outside of the athletes are what people are saying locally, and explaining and being liberal with your communication is really important. That is tough over 11 years. So I think that we need to rethink that. I think there is another element here, and listen, this is not a criticism of Brisbane. As you know, Bruce, I'm effectively an honorary Australian, but I think we have to be really clear. The world changes every 10 minutes. You and I know that. The world knows that. I think it's possibly not the best way to deliver or to choose a venue 12, 13 years out, because you don't know strategically where the world is going to shift. You don't know what burgeoning markets are going to be open to you. I think you need a little bit more flexibility in that.
And you mentioned venue, but the venue within the venue is a big talking point. There's a review, a Senate inquiry going on at the moment. So do you have a position, Lord Coe, on whether the Gabba should be reworked, whether Victoria Park, a brand new stadium, or whether they go back to the Commonwealth Games Stadium of 1982 and rejig that?
Bruce, I've used this expression before. I'm going to use it again. I'm far too long in the tooth to get involved in the local complexities. It is for local communities, it's for organising committees, and for the International Olympic Committee to decide what works best and what is going to leave the best possible legacy, because legacy is important here. You don't want a Games just to be 3 weeks of outstanding sport and then a couple of years' time, people forgetting the impact that has had. So I'm going to leave that to those local organisations that are best placed to decide that. What I do know is you want to leave an indelible legacy. If you have the demand for a permanent venue, then make sure you've got your legacy tenancies in place and build it, because that is an investment in a community. It's not a cost. If you're not sure that you have that ongoing demand, make sure you use what is existing or even temporary. And I don't see any other way around that. It's really important that we deliver a Games that is transparent, accountable, cost-effective and efficient. And that has to be a judgment made by local people.
One final thing on that. A ballpark figure, what's the right capacity for a stadium to host an opening ceremony and athletics?
If this were a World Championships within World Athletics, we tend not to like anything under about 40,000. We've had bigger stadiums, we've had smaller stadiums, and they've worked. But I think there's a spirit, there's a moment, there's a celebration in a good number of people enjoying an opening ceremony. And actually, so often the opening ceremony venue is your track and field facility as well. So those are always balances to be made. In Los Angeles, of course, it's going to be slightly different because athletics is going for the first week as opposed to our historic place in the second week. And that is in part due to some of the complexities of the opening ceremony. SoFi, the new arena in Los Angeles, is going to be the venue for the opening ceremony and the swimming. We're back for the third time at the Coliseum, which obviously warms me. And you have to be adaptable. There is no one size fits all. And if you work collaboratively, you can normally work your way through these.
Look, you said a few moments ago that the world changes every 10 minutes, and in athletics it's going through a revolution. Michael Johnson's Grand Slam starting this year, and you've supported that. The Ultimate Championship that'll be in Budapest next year, in the in-between years for world athletics. With all these things happening, is there still room for a coherent and significant Commonwealth Games, do you think?
Yes, I do. I do. And look, my performances and appearances at Commonwealth Games have not been the high watermark of my career. I was either injured or ran like a sewer on those occasions. There is a really clearly defined presence that the Commonwealth Games has. And look, I don't want to get into the political morass here, but sport is probably the commonality that we have in the Commonwealth, and we should hold on to that. And let me make a case for Commonwealth Games athletics. You know, to win a sprint title, you're going to have to beat the powerhouse of sprinting, which is Jamaica. To win an endurance title, you're going to have to take on a large part of Africa. And the technical events, of course, are becoming stronger and stronger all the time, particularly in Australia. So the Commonwealth Games Track Championship is not a gimme. It's a very, very high quality event. Does this give the Commonwealth Games the opportunity to re-engineer itself and maybe become an incubator for creativity and innovation? Yes, I think it does. But I would be sorry to see the Commonwealth Games disappear. You
mentioned Australia's success in the technical events. We're going through a resurgence down under Lord Coe. As you would know, our performances in Budapest, Paris, and more recently in Lima at the World Junior Championships. Have you kept your eye on that?
I have. I've watched Australian athletics for many, many years. My first visit to Australia was actually back in the mid-90s. And I watched closely Australian athletics. I'm very friendly with all the federations that have represented the sport, including the current team that are there, the coaches. There's some really talented young coaches coming through. And I'm glad, Bruce, you mentioned Lima, because my view has always been that if you want the most accurate audit of where your sport currently sits in terms of health and vibrancy, don't automatically go to World Championships or look at the senior ranks. Look at what's coming through behind. And Australia's performance in Lima, I was there for the entirety of the competition, was jaw-droppingly good, and that bodes really well. There are challenges, and we shouldn't be coy or naive about that. The attrition rate of athletes really performing well at junior ranks, even winning world championship medals as juniors, is a challenge because many don't actually even make it into their senior teams. Now, there are a number of reasons for that, often educational, sometimes external challenges. But it is really important at the moment that when you do look at our junior ranks, we've got some really, really talented competitors, both in track and field, coming through.
One of those juniors, you would have, in fact, a couple of them, but I'll ask you about Gout firstly, a silver medalist in Lima, and then, of course, doing something quite remarkable at the end of 2024 at 16 years of age, breaking a storied Australian record over 200 metres. You know about him. There's a lot of excitement surrounding the potential. Would you like to talk about his prospects?
Yeah, I mean, and so there should be a lot of excitement. He is an outstanding talent. But again, I use words of caution here because what you're doing at the age of 16, however talented and however extraordinary, and it is, Bruce, by any stretch of the imagination in any era, I also want to make sure, I hope that those that have a responsibility for navigating and choreographing his career also know that the hard years are still ahead. If that is navigated carefully and he remains uninjured and mentally in decent shape, and you've got a coaching team and a federation that can, to the best of their abilities, reduce some of those external pressures that I can sense are already building in terms of expectation, you have an outstanding prospect.
You mentioned the federation. The week of your presentation in Lausanne, the Australian Athletics has rebranded itself. I guess the message is from the bottom up, that engagement with the community, the people that go out for a run every day or once a week and involved, but not at the elite level, bringing everybody together. I'm not sure if you had an opportunity to see the message from Australian Athletics as we now know it, but if you have, your reaction?
I entirely endorse the approach they're taking, and it's one we've taken at World Athletics. All our elite events, and we stage 7 World Championships every few years, in very different disciplines: race walk, cross country, indoors, outdoors, juniors, seniors. We now have a world road racing, world road running championships. We have a much closer relationship with mountain and trail, and that's a growing market, particularly in Asia. It is really important that we recognise that we are the most accessible sport, that we can link in to some of the pressing government agendas, particularly around health and the vibrancy and health of local communities, particularly turbocharged after COVID. And athletics is best placed, and I think Athletics Australia has entirely understood that, and that is the right direction to be taking. And encouraging people to run is a very good thing. When I became president of World Athletics, I asked myself 3 questions. And I think these are the same questions that Athletics Australia are asking themselves, and I think in large part answered through this new strategy. How do you make decisions that are transparent? You talked about grassroots. The chairs of local athletics clubs at Sandringham or wherever it happens to be must know why a decision has been made at the highest level. The second question you ask is, who do you want in your sport? And that's important, because you want people of the right calibre and morality too. Only when you've answered those 2 questions can you really go on to the third question, which we've already addressed here in this discussion, Bruce, and that is, how do you grow the sport? How does it remain salient, exciting, and with meaning in the lives of young people? And that is the holy grail that member federations, international federations, national Olympic committees, all our stakeholders must grapple with, and we have to do better at that. And I'm very pleased to see our key federations, our key member federations in World Athletics taking that kind of lead. It's absolutely in alignment with where we have positioned ourselves as a global sport.
Lord Coe, I think about your relationship with the Olympics as an athlete and 4 pivotal moments: a defeat to Ovett at 800, the comeback to win the 15, the lap of honour, the controversy 4 years later about your selection in the 1500 and the triumph, and then 4 years after that, the non-selection. And I'm told that you went off to an island and didn't watch a thing. So it's been near and dear, hasn't it?
Yeah, I dealt with it really well on that occasion, Bruce. I disappeared off to a Mediterranean island on a beach with a family-sized beer, trying to pretend it wasn't taking place. Unhelpfully, an Italian waiter who recognised me came across and gave me all the results at the end of the day. It rather made irrelevant the effort I made to try and find myself in wilderness. But I'm dealing with it. I get counselling most days. I'm sort of coming to terms with it.
I'm glad I mentioned it. Just finally, no Englishman woman has been president of the International Olympic Committee. No individual gold medalist has been president of the IOC. What would it mean to you if the vote goes your way in 6 weeks' time?
It would be the privilege of my life, Bruce. I don't think I can articulate it any better than that.
That'll do. Thank you so much for your time, Lord Coe.
Bruce, thank you.
Discover more great ABC podcasts, live radio and exclusives on the ABC Listen app.